Hi, welcome today. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our Zoom call is on the Texas Homestead Exemption seminar. So this audio and video is going to be shared on my YouTube channel as well, Ruby the Realtor. So you can pass it along to your clients or for reference, where we're going to discuss the different Texas Homestead exemptions. So we'll jump right into it. So first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ruby Almendarez, and I work with Coldwell Banker Real Estate, and I have Ana Moody here with Stewart Title. She's been with Stewart for a long time, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ruby, for giving me the opportunity to join you in this Zoom class. Today, we're going to talk about the homestead exemption and different exemptions that the district appraisals offer for the customers. Very first thing that we're going to start is, what is the Texas Homestead Exemption? The Texas Homestead Exemption allows you to reduce the amount of property taxes you pay on your primary residence. While the amount it just depends on the county that you're in and also the value of your property. You can apply for several different exemptions. The first one is a general homestead exemption. You can also apply for an over 65 exemption. And then a homeowner's disability, and then there's also what it's called a VA disability. So those are four common exemptions that are used in different counties. Where the first one we're going to talk about is going to be the general homestead exemption. The general homestead exemption allows the customers to take away a percentage of the value of their property. So in instance, the Harris County Appraisal District allows you to take off 20% of the value of the property. So in this instance, Ruby has mentioned that means that if a home is valued at 175, then they will take 25,000. So you would only pay a value of the 150,000. It doesn't mean that you pay $25,000 less. It means that they reduce a certain amount of the taxes of the value of the property. That way you only pay for 150 versus 175, okay? An over 65 exemption is a person who's over 65 and they qualify for that exemption. It is probably better for your customers, if you have a seller that has an over 65 exemption, it is very important you as an agent to ask your customers, do you have a homestead exemption? And are you buying another property? Because these exemptions, unlike the homestead exemption, those exemptions can be removed within the year. So if they purchase a property in January, they can qualify for that exemption that January. They don't have to live in the property as of January the 1st. And of course, that will be the over 65 exemption. If let's say you and your spouse own the property and you're 55 but your spouse is 65, you still qualify for that over 65 exemption. So it's very important when you have buyers or sellers for you to ask that question so they can take advantage of this exemption. Okay, the next exemption we're going to talk is a disability, a homeowner's disability. A homeowner's disability exemption is a little bit different from the homestead exemption and from the over 65 exemption. The disability exemption, you have to have paperwork and you have to be disabled. There's different forms that you have to complete with the appraisal district. So if you have any type of disability, it is good for you to contact the appraisal district to find out and see if your disability qualifies for that exemption, what forms you have to apply for, and what forms you have to turn in. Now, the disability exemption is just like the over 65 exemption. So if you are disabled in May or in June, you can apply for that exemption as of that month. You do not have to live on the property as of January the 1st. And there's different type of disability exemptions, okay? The next exemption we're gonna talk is the disabled veterans exemption. Now that is different. The veterans have this disability exemption that they can apply for. Of course, they do. If you have a buyer that he tells you, I am military vet, okay, do you have any disabilities? They do have 100% disability, but they also have different percentages. Some of them are 50% disabled. Some of them are 60% disabled. So each bracket, each percentage qualifies for a discount. Of course, they do have to have information from the military in order for them to apply. Also, just like the over 65 exemption and like the disability exemption, they can apply for that exemption at any time during the year. If, let's say, you have a seller that is purchasing a property, they're selling their house in June and buying another one, he can move that exemption from that property when he closes on his house into the new property, okay? Now, the good thing about a disabled exemption, a veteran disability exemption, is that they pay zero taxes. They have to be 100% disabled in order for them to qualify for this exemption. If they only have a certain percentage, like let's say they're only 50% disabled or 60% disabled, they must contact the appraisal district, but they do qualify also for an exemption for that disability, okay? The next one is, who qualifies for a homestead exemption in the state of Texas? The first thing is you must own the home for a homestead exemption. You must own the home as of January the 1st. So if you purchase your property December 28th or December 29th, let's say 2020, you qualify for a 2021 homestead exemption. Remember, taxes in the state of Texas are paid in arrears, meaning that we're not going to pay our taxes for 2021 till the end of December. So you will qualify for this year for a homestead exemption. The home that you are filing for the homestead exemption must be your primary residence, meaning that is the home that you must occupy. You must live in that home. You cannot claim a homestead on two properties. You can only claim a homestead exemption on one property. The homestead exemption protects your home from any type of like garnishments and judgments. Your homestead in the state of Texas, it is protected by the homestead. So you can only apply for the homestead exemption on the property that you live. Also, your surviving spouse is the following. If you have an over 65 exemption, or if you have a disability veterans exemption, you qualify if you're a surviving spouse. So let's say I am married to a disabled veteran. I will qualify for that exemption for that year, but after that, it will fall. But if, let's say, my husband is over 65, I'm only 59, my husband passes away, I qualify as a surviving spouse for that over 65 exemption, as long as that's my primary home and I continue living on that property, okay? But we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. How do you apply and how do you file? You can go on the Harris County Appraisal District, and it has the information here. It's hcat.org, and it has the different forms that you can upload, apply for fill out, complete the forms, and mail them in. You must check with the appraisal district that you're applying for an exemption. Because of COVID right now, some of them are making exceptions where you can fax those forms. However, there's also an app that you can upload into your phone. I know that iPhones have it and Android's phones have it. You can upload it's called HCAD, HCAD application. And it looks something like this. I don't know if you can look at it, but if you upload it, you can also apply through the phone. Now, the way that you apply for it is you have to have, in order for you to apply for this exemption, the address of the property must be on your driver's license in order for you to qualify. Also, you have to have a government issued ID. And this is a US government issued ID, meaning it can be a military ID, it could be a driver's license, an ID, a US passport. Unfortunately, if you have a passport of your country, does not qualify as an ID, so you will not be able to qualify for this exemption. If you're doing it on the phone, if the address of the property is on your driver's license, you go into this app, you put in your address, and it'll pull up your account. I think you take a picture of the front and back of your driver's license and upload it, and that will that'll upload the information to them, and then you can apply for the homestead exemption and also the over 65 exemption, because if you look at your ID, it has your date of birth. So they will be able to verify if you're over 65 with your driver's license. So you can also apply for the over 65 exemption online, okay? Do you need to keep applying every year? No, you do not. The homestead exemption, you do not have to keep applying for it every year. As long as you own the property and as long as you occupy the property, a homestead exemption will stay there for the remainder of the time as long as you occupy the home. Now, the over 65 exemption is a little bit different. On an over 65 exemption, the appraisal district sends out forms every 2 to 3 years, and it's a little green form, and it says, do you still occupy the property? If your customers do not say yes and mail it back, they might remove that over 65 exemption. So it's very important that you make note of that. If you have a buyer or a seller that says, you know what, they removed my over 65 exemption and I do not know why, they need to contact the appraisal district. That might have happened. What they call it is a return mail. So they're saying, well, nobody returned the mail. That means nobody's occupying the property. You don't qualify for that exemption. Okay. Now, if you go ahead.
Sorry, and that
every 2 to 3 years, the appraisal district will send out a form to verify that they're still occupying the property, that the person that's over 65 is occupying the property. If you have a seller that says, my husband was 70 and I'm only 55 and he qualified for an over 65 exemption. My husband has been dead for 3 years and they still have that over 65 exemption. You have to be careful and you have to make sure that you make him aware you are a surviving spouse, therefore you do qualify for that over 65 exemption, but you have to apply for that exemption. The appraisal district is not going to automatically give that exemption. They have to do that application. So if you're married to somebody that is over 65 and they are deceased and you're not 65 yourself, you have to apply for the surviving ship over 65 exemption. It's not something that they're going to give you right away. Okay?
Okay.
So the next one is the deadlines. For the homestead exemption, you have from January the 1st till April the 30th to apply for that exemption. So let's say your customer purchased a property last year in June, so they can apply for this exemption for the year 2021 because they live in the property. But let's also say you have a customer that has been living in the property for the past 2 years and qualify for that homestead exemption, and he never applied for it. He can still apply for the homestead exemption. And when you do your application, now he won't be able to do it online, but he can do the forms. And on the form, it'll tell you what years are you applying for a homestead exemption. So if he bought that property in 2019, he qualifies for that homestead exemption for the year 2020 and 2021. So what the appraisal district can do is they can go back and apply that exemption for the year 2020 and then issue him a refund, send the information to the taxing authorities, and the taxing authorities will issue him a refund for an overpayment too. So it's very important that you know that information too. If you have a buyer that bought the property 3 years ago and never applied for the homestead exemption, say, well, you might want to do that just in case they owe you money and they'll give you that money back, okay? Now, if you have any questions, you have to call the appraisal district. I know the information that I'm giving to you is the most information that Ruby gathered and also that I noticed from the experience that I have closing files. But if you want more accurate information and you have any other questions, it is very important that you contact the appraisal district and talk to them. Of course, a lot of people don't like to call them because they're going to be on the phone for 2 or 3, sometimes 20 to 30 minutes, but you're getting the information from the people that give these exemptions. It is very good for you to stay on top of these things because if you have buyers that purchased their property last year, that'll be a good contact for you to call them and say, hey, have you applied for your homestead exemption? Have you changed your driver's license? When I do my closings, I make sure I tell my buyers, it is your responsibility to change the taxes into your name, and it's also your responsibility to apply for any type of exemption that you might qualify. It is very important that you change the address on your driver's license in order for you to apply for this exemption. So that way they know that they have to. Make sure that you also notify your buyers when they purchase their properties, they'll call you, or they usually call the title company a couple of weeks later, or a couple of months later and say, hey, I got this little form that says that they'll apply for me for the homestead exemption and they'll charge me $65. The services are free. There's no charge to apply for any type of exemption, not for an over 65 exemption, not for a homestead exemption. They can go directly to the appraisal district and apply for those exemptions themselves, or download the app and do it themselves. Okay?
To ask on that, if somebody does try to solicit people to help them with the homestead exemption at a fee, is that illegal or are they allowed to do that?
It is not illegal, because their services that they're providing, but you don't have to pay for it. It is not illegal because then what they'll do is they fill out the form. So they're charging them to complete the form and do that and send it in, which is something that you can do for free. Yeah. And that now the homestead exemption forms do have to be notarized. So they have to be notarized. So they have to notarize them. So maybe they're charging for that fee. I do not know. So make your buyers aware that when they're ready to file their homestead exemption, if they want to, they're more than welcome to come here and we'll notarize the form for them. That is not a problem if they're not, tech savvy or they don't want to use the app. But it might be a good thing for you to upload the app on your phone. That way you can have those services for your buyers and say, once you change your driver's license, and I'll contact you January the 1st, and then we'll upload it and put it in the system, and that way you can apply for that homestead exemption. Okay.
Hey, Ana, so are you saying that because we can do it on the app now, you do not have to have it notarized, correct?
Right. If you do it on the app, you do not have to have it notarized. Okay. But the address of the driver's license must be the driver's license of the property, the address of the property, correct? Mm-hmm. And we have this younger generation, and the younger generation are more tech savvy than I am and anybody else is. And the only reason I know is because I had a customer, or my cousin purchased the property, and she just did it over the weekend. And she said, it is so easy, Ana. All I have to go in there is upload the app, put my address, take a picture front and back of our driver's license and upload it. And it says, you have successfully completed the homestead exemption. So it is an easy way to apply for that exemption. Okay.
Question, can it just be done for the homestead exemption on the app, or can you apply for like the over 65 on the app?
You can apply for the over 65 exemption because the driver's license will have their date of birth. So they will be able to verify that that person is 65. So those are actually two exemptions that you can only apply for, which is the homestead exemption and the over 65 exemption. Now, a disability exemption will not be able, or a surviving spouse over 65, you cannot do that. You have to do those forms online. I mean, you have to do those forms, have to complete the forms and send them into the appraisal district. Mm-hmm. Now, there's different districts. I know Harris County has the app, but I do not know if Montgomery has it, Brazoria, or the counties, around our areas, they might not be there yet. But I know that Harris County does have that app. I know that Montgomery doesn't. So Montgomery, everything has to be done by mail. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you have any questions, if you have a sellers that have any type of questions on disabilities, or buyers that have any type of questions on disabilities, just contact me, and then I'll contact the appraisal district and find out and see if we can help them in any way to try to solve their tax issues. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ana. Unless, does anybody else have any other questions for Ana?
So in order for them to have a disability counted for them, like get credit for a disability, they need to have that disability, in a sense, registered, correct?
Right. What I suggest is, if they have any type of disability, or if they're disabled veterans, if you have a seller that has any type of those disabilities, I suggest that they contact the appraisal district. Okay. That way they can know exactly what forms to apply. Or if you have a buyer that is a vet and he says, you know what, I'm an exempt vet, I've never owned property, and that'll be your cue to say, oh, you have an exemption as a veteran, let's contact the appraisal district. That way you can have your forms completed, and that way that way when you get your taxes, you're ready for that exemption.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Anybody has any other questions?
I'm good. Thank you, Ana. Very, very good. Very informative.
I'm sorry?
I said very informative.
Thank you. Well, and you have my information. Again, my name is Ana Moody and I work for Stewart Title. You have my email, but I also have a cell phone. You can call me at any time, text me at any time if you have any questions. I might not reply right away on my cell phone, but I try to get back to my customers. So I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity, Ruby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for providing all that very good information to everybody. Because I know some people, you know, they hear about the homestead exemption, but they don't really understand it. And they're confused about what exactly, how does it benefit me, or is there a cost? So thank you so much for addressing those questions and for talking about the app and everything. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. And we'll be seeing you next time.
Okay, it was a pleasure. Nice seeing you.
Thank you.
Y'all
Bye.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Mhm.